My name is Rory Moore, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about strategic partnerships in order to implement the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, because this is an issue I'm passionate about, but also everyone who's doing impact work, whether on a local or national level, needs to implement partnerships in order to expand their impact beyond borders and help as many people as possible around the world. So firstly, why strategic partnerships and why is that important for delivering impact? Well, from the work that I've done, I've seen that no single person sitting in one place in the world can deliver impact on a global level without engaging other people who have expertise and who have connections. For example, I started the world's largest COVID-19 volunteer organisation, but when I started it in my town, I was sitting in my bedroom in my parents' house in Surrey in the southeast of the United Kingdom, and I never intended to create a global volunteer organisation. But when I started the organisation in my town, it was clear, speaking to some of my colleagues and some of my friends from other parts of the world, that as the pandemic spread, we needed to have a solution to allow volunteers to connect with people who needed help all around the world. And simply put, me in my bedroom in Surrey, I wasn't able to access these opportunities to deliver impact all around the globe, and partnerships were the best way to implement that impact. So, working with a range of different colleagues around the world who had those connections in different places, I expanded my impact by making partnerships with different types of organisations all around the world. So that's an example of how strategic partnerships are a really effective way of scaling impact. So that's why strategic partnerships are important, but more importantly, how can we actually implement them? So I'm going to talk about strategic partnerships in government first. So if you're a social entrepreneur or someone who is delivering change on a local level in your country or your town, you might think, well, there's no chance that I can work with the government, so why is public sector partnerships important to me? Well, the first thing I would say is that the government has the resources and the connections to mobilise great numbers of individuals and resources in order to deliver impact. So it's important that we consider how to work with government and why we should do that. And in the experiences I've had, I've done a lot of work with the government to advise them on how they can deliver impact themselves. So, for example, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom asked me to advise the government on volunteering strategy. So I'm currently working to see how we can use civil society in the United Kingdom to bring parts of the country together and use volunteering as a tool for really scaling up impact around the world. And so what I'd say is that partnerships with government are an effective tool, but they're not always something you can deliver from the start. And so how can you get to be able to do decision making and engage in advisory with government? Well, I think one of the key things to remember is that when it comes to partnering with the government, it's about having an MVP and having a product that you can put out there in terms of advisory and in terms of a scalable impact solution. So I had a technology application that connected volunteers who people needed help during the pandemic, and the government saw the experience that I had and wanted to engage with me and leverage the experiences I've had to help civil society in the United Kingdom. So this is a really effective way of scaling your impact and also taking the learnings you've had from your own social impact experiences and putting those across to government who can then implement on a wider scale. So partnering with governments is a really effective way of expanding your impact as an organisation, and that of course varies depending on where you are in the world and how you can relate to government, but that's a key one to remember. But also beyond government, it's really important to remember that partnerships don't have to just be executed in your own space or in your own sector, but also with other types of organisations. So I've done a lot of work partnering with corporations in terms of social impact. And quite often people will say, if you're in the third sector, there's not really a connection with the private sector, and why should individuals partner with corporations to expand impact? And what I've seen in my work is that corporations have a great access to resources that allow you to take your impact to the next level. And the thing is, when you're partnering with corporations, they have an incentive as well to do so. So there are various rules and regulations in different countries all around the world, but in many countries, companies are required, or certainly are driven by market forces, to engage in corporate social responsibility. So quite often, they'll be on the lookout for impact opportunities. And so this is why you should consider partnering with a corporation, because not only are they interested, but it also gives you the chance to expand your impact. So I was working with a private equity company to run their social impact business. And we realized that if we could engage corporations around the world, then this would give us the opportunity to get our word out there, because corporations have the opportunity to provide you with a large amount of exposure when you're doing good work. Because if you're a small organization operating in a town or a city, perhaps not everyone knows about your work, but obviously corporations have much bigger networks and the ability to showcase your work. So it's not just a functional opportunity to expand your impact, but also by working with corporations, you can increase your exposure and get your name out there, which can lead to potential future partnerships across sectors as well. So it's important to remember that strategic partnerships aren't just about working within your own sector, they aren't just about engaging with governments, but it's also about making connections with corporations. And this is one that we perhaps forget about the most in the social impact space, that actually the most important strategic partnerships are actually within your own sector. So if you're an NGO or a social enterprise, then working with other NGOs or social enterprises is a fantastic way of increasing your network and also increasing your scope for impact. So what do I mean by that? Well, when I started a volunteering organisation during the pandemic to tackle the issues that people had during isolation around the world, we partnered with other NGOs to increase our impact and increase their impact. Our model was that we had a digital infrastructure to connect volunteers with people who needed help during the pandemic. And the way that we expanded this across 40 countries and 6 continents was by actually engaging other NGOs on the ground. Now, some of these NGOs were already doing impact work, or some were even doing COVID-19 volunteering work. So you might wonder, what was the point of partnering with them and why would they be interested in that? Well, given our situation, as I mentioned, we had an application which allowed volunteers to log onto our app and see who needed help in their area. And so by partnering with other NGOs on the ground in different countries, we were able to give them access to our infrastructure, which meant volunteers of their organisations could come on our app and also find out people who needed help elsewhere. Because if the organisation was just working in one town, then it had the opportunity to find out other people needed help in the nearby area. And so this was a really good model for NGOs to expand their impact by working with us, but also it gave us the way and the mechanism to expand our impact across the globe as an organisation that was based in the UK. The reason why it's so important to work with them is they have the experience on the ground and the expertise to deliver impact. Because as I mentioned before, as someone who's sitting in the UK, who hasn't got the experience of working across a range of 40 markets across 6 continents, it's actually really important to get engaged with organisations on the ground who are already doing really good work. So the strategic partnerships within the NGO space are a very important way of increasing impact, because it actually gives you expands your network and gives you the opportunity to connect with like-minded individuals and organisations on the ground, and therefore scale up your impact with organisations who have similar values. I'm currently building a foundation to provide skills education in countries across the world and also increase access to education. So what we're doing is actually very pioneering in the third sector, because quite often in the third sector we have fantastic organisations who are doing work on the ground and providing assistance to those who need help through programs and initiatives, but actually those people have the best experience of what the situation is on the ground, and that should be communicated to policymakers. So the foundation I'm currently building, Better World, is actually bridging the gap between NGOs and policymakers, and actually facilitating the chance for policymakers to hear about the experience of NGOs on the ground. So what we're doing is we're working and advising governments around the world on how to implement skills education into their curriculum. And this is a new approach, as I say. We don't often see NGOs having the chance to make their voices heard at a national level in policy making. And this is where the scope of impact is actually the biggest, because the governments coming up with the curriculum that young people study, have the ability to shape the future education of young people. And so we are actually giving NGOs the chance to make their voices heard and use the experience they have, and the government can also benefit from that too. And this is something that is a unique model which shows how strategic partnerships, both with governments but also with other NGOs, really is an interesting and a unique way of creating impact. And it's important that we look at all those different things and think about why they're useful. So if there's anything I think you should take away from this talk, I think it is that strategic partnerships can take a number of different forms, and you should always keep your mind open to the way in which you can expand your impact as an individual or an organisation. You don't just have to work with other individuals or organisations in your own area, or it doesn't have to just be with the same type of organisations in your sector. Rather, you should keep your mind open and think outside of the box, whether that's by partnering with governments or partnering with corporations or indeed NGOs in different parts of the world. So in terms of how I will measure success, I think it's not always about looking at the bottom line, or it's not just about how much money a company can make. From the work that I've done and the experience that I've had, I've seen that real success is actually about impact and how many lives of people around the world you can help. And that's ultimately, I think, as a sustainable planet, that's what we should be focusing on. Not about profit generation, but actually about how we can make the world a better place and help as many people as possible. If you're interested in hearing more about what I said today, then feel free to reach out to me via DLC Genie, or you can also contact me on LinkedIn, the details of which are on the website.